Hello, Michael, and welcome to the Beyond Limits Virtual Summit. I'm so glad that you agreed to do this conversation. And I want to say a little bit before I give you a chance to share. And then the floor
I'm jumping right in
be
because
yours.
the choice originally of I could come do it in Edinburgh, I could go do it in Singapore, or in my office. So thanks. Yeah.
Yes,
In my office during
that's true.
quarantine, definitely choice one. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. We did fantasize about Singapore, but the future maybe we'll do it then. But Michael, as you know, but I want to share with the audience listening or watching that, I attribute you and our work together for completely opening me up to what I consider a really revolutionary way to look at how to lead my life, create in my life, do my own business, and then it changed the work I do with people significantly. And I know we're going to, have a conversation about that today, but I just want to say for those listening that, you know, the ideas and the principles and the understanding and the orientation that you're going to be sharing today, for me, is the reason why I'm actually sitting here doing this virtual summit. After working with you for, I think it was a little over a year and kind of deepening my own understanding in this work, I was speaking at a conference and in our field, in our industry. And I remember driving in the car and thinking kind of two thoughts. One was man, Michael Neill, a guy that I found on the internet.
Sounds dodgy already.
Sounds worse as I say it that way. But, and then got to know you. And then through following that inner nudge and that kind of connection, I just thought it was so fascinating that, one person, one yes, a yes to working together, to listening, to exploring what you were pointing me to, could have such a significant impact in my life and in the work I do with others. So I'll just take this chance now to say thank you once again. And over the years, I have loved nothing more than our continued friendship and colleagues. And I look forward to people hearing your wisdom today. So thank you, Michael.
Well, you are very welcome. It has been a treat from my side too.
Well,
Oh, chick I met on the internet.
That'll be our tweetable moment. So, Michael, I really know that with you, there are so many places that we could go. But prior, when we were kind of talking about what would be most valuable here, you were sharing with me kind of what's been really fresh for you around how this understanding makes a difference in our work and our lives. And I think I'm just inclined to turn it over to you right now and have you kind of kick us off and share what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I have always been fascinated by the process of creation. How do things get created in the world? How does something that does not exist suddenly exist? And by suddenly, it might take 20 years. But how does it go from nothing to something? How does it go not just from idea to reality, but where does the idea even come from? So that is my domain. That is where I love exploring and playing with clients and in the world. And when I've worked with CEOs, when I've worked with businesses, when I've worked in fields with sort of teams, work teams and thought tanks, think tanks in fields, the fundamental shift that this understanding has allowed me to make with them, even though many of the people I work with are far more senior than I ever was, or more, important than I'll ever be. But I know something that they don't know, which is I know where to look. There's an old story stroke. It's more a story than a joke because it's not that funny. But my dad used to work on nuclear submarines. He designed parts for and worked with the Navy, the U.S. Navy. And so he used to tell this story of there was a nuclear submarine that was preparing to launch, and it was a big deal, and the press were coming out, and they'd spent billions on this thing, and it wouldn't start. Like the night before, they're sitting there and they cannot get, all the king's horses and all the king's men cannot get this thing going. And the admiral is just like, somebody do something. And this guy goes, well, look, I know this sounds crazy, but there's a plumber in town who's apparently like a miracle worker. Maybe he can help. They're like, is he cleared? I don't even know if he knows what we do, but it's all right, get him. So they go out, they get this guy, he comes out with his little, I always visualize Mario from the game, but like he comes out with his little, toolbox, and he walks around the submarine, and the admiral's like, well, do you know anything about submarines? And he goes around, and the admiral's kind of following him around because he wants to see what the hell this guy's going to do. And the guy's kind of following various pipes and conduits, and he stops a few places. And then he stops at one place, puts his toolbox down, takes out a hammer, and goes, whack, before anyone can stop him. And they're like, oh my God, he's sabotaging the sub. But all of a sudden, the whole thing comes on. Everything comes online. All systems go. And nobody can quite believe it, but it's running, and they do tests, and it's like, yeah, everything is running perfectly. And the admiral's like, wow, well, I guess you better give me your bill. And he hands him a bill for $10,000. And the admiral's like, look, I'm sorry, I know you probably think we're easy targets, we're known for overspending, but I watched you. You spent about 20 minutes walking around, and how do you justify this? And the plumber said, well, would you like an itemized bill? And he said, well, yes, I would. And so he wrote out an itemized bill, and the bill read, for tapping with hammer, $5. For knowing where to tap, $9,995. And to a certain extent, what this understanding does is it shows us where to tap. It shows us where to look. It doesn't tell us what we'll find, because what we'll find may be different everywhere we look. But it's very consistent where to look. It's a very consistent orientation. Where to tap might be different, but where to look for where to tap is the same.
I love that. And I think that's it. And so in your mind, like, one thing that comes up for me is, for sure, I thought where to tap was my effort, my strive, my push, my discipline, and yet I know now, right, that I was tapping at the wrong place,
You're already one up, because most people think it's my people's drive, it's my people's effort, it's my people's will. At least you might have something to do.
Yeah. So when what is the right direction in your mind, or the right place to look?
Well, there's this will come as no surprise to anyone by the time we're done. I have a story about that.
Go on. Yeah.
I first heard it as a teaching story I think in Zen, but it's somewhere, it was one of the Eastern philosophies. And they talked about a man who lived by a river. And one day he looked out into the river and he saw somebody drowning in the river, and he dove in and managed to save them and get them to the side. And they were, of course, very grateful, and he felt good about what he'd done. But then when he looked back, there were 2 more people drowning. And he dove back in, and again, he managed to get them out. But by the time he looked back, there were 4, and then there were 8. And even though he knew there was no way he could save them all, he also knew he had to try. And so every day he would go down to the river, and he would spend his days trying to get people out of the river before they drowned. And some he was able to save, and some he was not. And some of the people that he saved were sufficiently grateful and moved that they joined him. And so they too would go down to the river every day. And soon he had a team. But no matter how many people he had on his team, there were still always more people drowning on the river than they could save. And as you can imagine, they found that kind of disheartening. They found themselves getting discouraged, but they would motivate themselves. Every day they would tell themselves, okay, well, made a difference to this one, and come on. And they would kind of try and keep each other excited about it. And some people would drift off and leave the village, but the core team were pretty committed. Until one day, the original man who'd first started saving people didn't show up for work that day. He didn't come to the river. And everyone thought, oh, maybe he's sick. But then he didn't come the next day. And by the 3rd day and 4th day and 5th day, they realized, oh God, he gave up. He It was too much for him. And some of them were very understanding about that. And some of them were just pissed off, and horrified. Well, they carried on. They renewed their commitment to the real people who really cared were going to stick with the job. And then one day, a miracle happened in their eyes, because they went an entire day without a single person drowning in the river. And they that night they said, we must always remember this day. We must mark it on our calendars. This is a beautiful day that we will never forget. But the next morning they went down to the river and there was no one drowning. And the next, and the next, and the next. And around the time that people were beginning to think, well, maybe we don't need to go down to the river anymore, they went down and there were people in the river again. And they dove in. Oh, I knew it was too good to be true. And they went to save them. And the people were like, what are you doing? And they said, we're saving you. And the people said, we're not drowning, we're swimming. And it was an entirely different experience. And they didn't quite know what to do. And that day, some of them went play and swam in the river too, because it was kind of fun. And that was the day that the original man came back. He showed up again. And they were like, oh my God. And some people were very happy to see him. And some had been harboring a lot of resentment and said to him, oh, yeah, welcome back now that we've solved this, now that we've saved all the people, why did you abandon us? Why did you abandon this? I thought you were committed to this. I thought this mattered to you. And the man was just baffled, because he said, what do you mean abandoned you? It just occurred to me one day that if there were this many people drowning in the river, they must be falling in somewhere. So I went upstream to see if I could find where they were falling in. And if I couldn't stop them from falling in, at the very least, I would try to teach them how to swim. Now, it's a metaphor, obviously, but it's a really apt one for the kinds of challenges that we face in business. We are continually putting out fires, saving drowning projects, saving drowning teammates, trying to keep things going, trying to keep it alive, trying to make sure that we clean up the mess. But there's always more mess than we can clean up. We never have enough resources available to us to do what really needs to be done to clean it up. And the idea of going upstream is like, well, yeah, that's great. You get me the authority to go above my boss's head to do that. You get me the time so that I can stop dealing with rescuing the people and go up. But it turns out it isn't about time and it isn't about resources. It really is just about seeing what upstream actually looks like. And in my sort of oversimplistic but generally helpful way of thinking, there's kind of 5 shifts in orientation that I've seen to be extremely relevant and helpful to any business or business person I've ever worked with. And I'm assuming that that would be a good thing to share.
I was just going to say, please do go on. I'd love to hear them. Absolutely.
So the first one is from the personal to the impersonal, or from the individual to the universal. So we tend to treat each person as if they have their own unique problems and challenges, and we have to learn to manage them. And if we don't go person by person, we go Myers-Briggs type by Myers-Briggs type. We go Enneagram style by Enneagram style. We go disc profile by disc profile. And we treat everyone fairly by treating them differently. And we do all this stuff that sounds really lovely and caring, but is why it's an endless game. Because if you can fix something that is universal, that is endemic, that is intrinsic, then you've fixed everything. And so simply looking not to what's his problem, what's her problem, what's that division's problem, but looking to what's going on behind the scenes here that all of this stuff is problematic. What is the nature of problems? What is the nature of solutions? What is the nature of creativity? What is the nature of innovation? What is the nature of each of these things that we're trying to address? This decision, that decision, instead of the nature of decisions. This problem, that problem, instead of the nature of problems. And when we start to look to the nature of something, it's a game changer. Because whatever we see about the nature of it helps us with all of it. And sometimes that shift alone is a game changer. But I saw a little question.
No, I'm just curious. I know you're going to say more, but can you say just like, what do you mean by the nature of it? What do you mean by that? Like,
Well, I'll give you an example. So I've worked with a fair number of decision makers at companies. And one of the things that I often wind up pointing out, because I've looked at the nature of decisions, is that decisions are what we do when we don't know. Basically, if we know what to do, we don't have a decision to make. It's only when we don't know we make a decision. And that's probably sounds well like, yeah, duh. But actually, 90% of the time we do know what to do. So that's why decisions seem like a big deal, because they're actually the times where we don't know what to do. But if I'm only making a decision when I don't know what to do, then by definition, I'm guessing. We put an extraordinary amount of time in trying to guess better as if it's scientific. Guessing's not scientific. Yes, you can do structured thinking. Yes, you can make educated guesses as opposed to just random guesses. But if you know that ultimately all you're doing is approximating, it doesn't carry with it that same burden of proof, that same sense of, I've got to get this right. If you knew what to do, you'd be doing it. Now, two things happen when people see this. Sometimes they go, oh my God, I don't need to actually do this because at some point I will know, I just don't have enough information yet. Or it's not time yet. That data will come in, that data set will be filled out, and then it will become obvious what to do. Sometimes people see, oh, this is always going to be a best guess. And so they take the pressure off themselves to get it right as if they could. So very specific example, I worked with an executive at a investment firm. And essentially, they sent him to me based on the idea that either they needed to get rid of him or he was going to be made a partner. Like, he was great and he was a nightmare. And I said to them, look, I'm not promising you which way this is going to go. And they said, no. And they were actually really cool about it. It wasn't a decision they wanted to make. They wanted to know. They wanted him in or out. I listened to him, and initially he told me about all the things that were going on at work and all the problems, all the downstream stuff he was dealing with. But what I heard, the more I listened to him, was, oh, you don't understand decision-making, which was ironic because he was essentially a quant. He was essentially a mathematical decision maker. So we looked together. I pointed to him what I'd seen about the nature of decisions. He had a lot of examples of decisions, and he saw, oh my gosh, that's true. Either I know or I don't. And he suddenly went through, and I've never worked with somebody, this is why it stuck in my mind, who made the shift this quick. Once he saw it, he ran through decision trees, every single decision that he had at work, in his personal life. And he was done by the end of the first day. Like, I had booked out 3 days with him. And he was so clear. It was so obvious that he really did know in each case. And then the few cases he didn't know, he didn't need to know, that I didn't know what to do. So I said, well, look, why don't you come back in tomorrow? But honestly, he came back in the next day, and it was like, yeah, he wasn't drowning, he was swimming. So I was like,
yeah.
So that's an example of how, when you see something true, at the macro level, the micro level takes care of itself.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I'm just kind of listening with an air of people. And, as you said, decisions seem way more complicated than what you're kind of saying. But if I want to make sure I'm kind of hearing you right, that, ultimately what you're saying is that when we have the clarity, it's there, right? And we kind of
Yeah,
know
because
what
when
to
you've
do.
got the clarity, you either know or you know that you don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, you're covered.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so in your mind, then, when you say the first place to look is at the nature of the problem, can you say a little bit more about that particular?
Well, I will, and I'm wary of getting into the details and particulars of universals.
Hey,
So,
absolutely. No, no, I support.
so what I'll say is, if if you can see that every presenting problem is a subset of something,
Mm,
if you can look upstream and see what is this an example of, and it actually turns out to be a relatively small set of possible things. It's a misunderstanding or lack of recognition about the nature of decisions, about the nature of motivation, about the nature of energy and where it comes from, about the nature of obstacles, about the nature of money, about the nature of time, about the nature of productivity. Like there's a bunch of them,
yeah.
but there's not an infinite number.
Hmm.
Whereas Michael's problem, Barb's problem, Tony's problem, Virginia's problem, well, there's as many of them as there are employees, and even within each person, we can have 17 different problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if all we did was take 1,000 problems and reduce it down to 10, that would be pretty helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, Michael. Good. All right. What's the next?
Oh, okay. On to number two. Well,
Yeah.
so one of the things that we are trained to do, most of us, um, is figure things out. Right. So we're trained to think about a problem and figure out what the problem is, why the problem is, whose problem it is, or whose fault it is, and what to do about it. And that works great one time in 10. And the other 9 times, it just gets people so bogged down and caught up and and just busy-minded and stuck going around in loops. Everyone thinks that's because, oh, well, you're not a good enough thinker. You need better tools for thinking. You need, no, it's just in the same way as if that plumber from the original example had taken out a drill instead of a hammer. Drills are great, but it's the wrong tool for that job. Our capacity to figure things out is helpful, just not for most of the things we try to use it for.
Mm.
It, it is incredibly helpful for physics problems, for things that are in the physical world. And I'm not going to get into, because I'm not qualified to get into, and we don't have time to get into quantum versus Newtonian and things like that. But effectively, I'll explain it the way that my high school physics teacher explained it to me. He said, if I kick a football and I know my leg speed, my altitude, the wind speed, I can predict within a fraction of an inch where that football is going to land. He said, but if I kick my dog, there's no telling where he's going to end up. Well, living systems don't follow figuring out formulas.
Mm.
So if you are dealing with any problem that has a human component, which is kind of most problems that we deal with in business, figuring it out is just the wrong tool for the job, because it's not a physics problem, it's a living systems problem. So when we're dealing with living systems, the shift in orientation is from figuring it out to listening. Now, we could say looking, but it is a much more receptive quality of mind that makes the difference. So sometimes I'll talk about it as it's the shift from thinking to listening. Well, how are we going to figure this out? We're going to think about it. As opposed to listening. Now, what do you listen to? Who do you listen to? You listen to the stakeholders. You listen to the people who are involved in it. You could listen to experts. You listen to that thing in us that just sometimes knows an answer that it has no business knowing. You listen to that innate intelligence. I talk about it as a real-time responsive intelligence. But you listen, you look, you get out of your head, and you get into receptivity. You get to a certain extent to, and I don't always love the way this word is used, but a kind of humility, which kind of goes, if I knew the answer, I'd know the answer. And if it's not Googleable and it's not figurable outable, then I have really, my only hope is to listen and look and hear and see, knowing that that use of the mind is really powerful.
Yeah, I think, I'll probably end up saying this about all of your points, right? Oh, that's my favorite. Oh, no, that's my favorite. But I think what you're pointing to right now versus the receptive and the listening versus the thinking, I've just seen it over and over again be a complete, I can't think of a better word other than game changer for folks. And this is like engineers who work on, kind of top secret kind of things, and the expectations are very, the demands are high. And I just spoke to this one gentleman in particular that I'm thinking of, and he said that it's when he realized that he didn't have to think things over and mull it over, that when he was in a freer mind, when he put things aside, he was actually accessing that deeper intelligence. For him, it changed his life, in a really sincere way. Like, he went home and he was able to be present with his family more and his young children, because he realized, he said, oh, I knew it would come. I knew I could listen and I would get ideas and things would happen, and then in light of the pandemic and everybody kind of shifting right now, I have another entrepreneur I'm thinking of, and he had two major projects stop, and one of them involved employees, but because of the social distancing, he had to shut the doors. And he was thinking and thinking and thinking, trying to figure out what to do for his employees. And it just looked dire. It looked kind of hopeless. And then he remembered exactly what you said, Michael. He said, oh, wait, I'm not listening. I am overthinking. I'm reactive. I'm clouded. And he knew where to go. And in that place, and that, again, kind of listening deeper, a freer mind, he got some really creative ideas on how to help his employees. And what I love about that story is those ideas were nowhere in his consciousness when he was thinking it over.
Yeah. And that's back to that thing that I was talking about what I love is, where do these ideas come from?
Yeah.
And people who say, and people do say, I don't have time to listen. Like, that would be great, but I need a solution now. Well, to me, the metaphor that always evokes in me, and I actually wrote this in one of my books, is, imagine that you're out for a walk and it's been raining, so everything's kind of muddy, and this car comes whipping around the corner and almost knocks you over, and you're able to kind of get out of the way and scream at it to stop, and you notice it is covered. The windshield is covered in mud, like there's no way these guys saw you there. They couldn't see anything. And the guy rolls his muddy window down, and he's incredibly apologetic, but he says, look, I got my mom is dying in the back seat and I got to get her to hospital. Well, you don't go, oh, don't worry about it, just keep going. You go, well, look, if you want to get her to hospital, you better take a minute to clean your windscreen or you're not getting anywhere. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing. Actually, it is when it feels most urgent that you really need to step back and take the time to listen. I was talking to somebody, I don't know, I was being interviewed for something last week. And I said something about urgency being, generally speaking, insecurity. It's just a manifestation of our own worry. And they said, well, but no, there are things going on right now that are genuinely urgent. And I said, well, if by the word urgent you mean there's a very short time frame relative to what you would normally have, that's true. But what most people mean by urgent is, it's going to happen now, and if it doesn't happen now, terrible things are going to happen, and it's going to be awful, and that's that muddy windscreen. That's that overthinking to the point where you couldn't hear if a solution whispered itself into your ear repeatedly. And people are often surprised by how little it takes to clear the windscreen and how much they see the second that they do.
That's great. Okay, number 3.
Number 3. So, what's the first thing you were taught at business school about when you got a problem? What do you do to it?
I'm afraid to answer.
You fix it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yes, yes, yeah.
Right. Well, the problem with looking at situations as problems to be fixed, looking at people as problems to be fixed, is A, you're going to see problems everywhere because you're coming in with a fix-it mentality, like our people rescuing the people in the river who weren't drowning, they were swimming. But no, we're going to save them. From what? But it also obscures probably the most powerful tool that human beings have in their arsenal, which is the ability to notice. Noticing is the single most underrated skill set I have come across in 32 years now of being a coach. For 2 reasons. One is most people are so busy-minded they don't notice 3/4 of what's going on. So they literally, if you think about any of the stories of the great detectives, the great detective, what makes them great is they're just better at noticing than everyone else because they're not distracted like everyone else is. They don't follow the red herrings. They don't get caught up. They actually notice what's going on. But the second is, even when we notice, we have noticing so attached to judging and fixing that we don't notice. So we think, oh yes, mindfulness. We did a program on mindfulness in our company. Oh yeah, but really what it was is, so what does that mean? Well, every time we do that stupid thing now, we snap a rubber band so that we won't do it. That's not noticing. That's trying to catch yourself being bad. Noticing is neutral. It's just, oh, wow, that's interesting. It's just, there's nothing on it. It's just curious. It's like, that would be the sound. That is the noticing sound. And it also might have the sound of, oh, because sometimes what you'll notice is just like, oh, I can't believe that's it. And noticing, the power of noticing is twofold. One, often what's going on is so simple and basic that we just miss it. Like, I am convinced that 3/4 of the problems that the businesses I consult with face could be solved by either more deep breaths or more naps. Right? Just because people are so unresourceful when they're trying to deal with stuff that they wind up making it worse more often than not. But the other power of noticing is we have this extraordinary intelligence in us. And when it sees what's really going on, it usually knows exactly what to do. There's no intervening plan needed. When I'll give you the most basic example of this, but also to my mind to this day, one of the best. I went to teach a course in Mallorca and got there early evening, and we're staying in this beautiful hotel that I was told, oh, you got to see the sunset. And so I had a balcony on my room, could not get the door open for love nor money. There was a key, so I thought, oh, it's locked, but I tried turning the key to the left, I tried turning the key to the right, I'm jiggling, I'm pushing, nothing is working. I phoned down to the front desk, and I'm getting frustrated because it's urgent, because I'm going to miss the sunset. They say, did you try the key? Of course I tried the key. I am not a moron. Send somebody up to my room. I'm a great guy. So somebody comes up to the room. He walks up to the door, and it's a sliding door.
That's great.
Now, it had not once occurred to me, because it had a handle, that it might slide. Like, I just assumed it must push or pull. Because I wasn't even in the room. I didn't notice anything. I was so busy trying to fix it that I didn't notice it. Once I saw, the solution was obvious. And most solutions are obvious. When one of the first consulting jobs I had is I was brought in to work on an advertising campaign with a UK advertising agency. And it was a public service campaign for buckling up in the back. And they showed me very proudly their campaign. And it was basically horror. It was pictures of dead children, bleeding bodies, just people who'd been killed in accidents. And it was genuinely like affecting. But I asked them what I thought was a kind of an obvious question. I said, how many of you have started buckling up in the back since you've worked on this campaign? And they looked at each other in horror. They hadn't noticed that it had no actual impact on their behavior. It just made them feel bad. So they assumed it must be working. So once they noticed that, they scrapped it because it was obvious. It wasn't about improvement. It was just the wrong idea. They looked at it again from the point of view of what would actually change behavior, the nature of, not what would get people to buckle up, but what makes people actually change. They saw new things. They created a campaign that most people in the UK of that generation called Clunk Click will recognize. And it had a huge impact on the traffic statistics. Once they noticed what was going on, the solution became quite apparent and obvious, even though it took a little bit of time to get to. Until you notice, what are you fixing?
Yeah. No, I love that. And I just want to ask you one question, kind of, as you share what resonates, I think maybe for the audience is I hear an opportunity here for how to respond to what might be happening in your business or your life due to, the stay at home and the pandemic. I think I hear an invitation in there for people to kind of notice what is with more neutrality, and they'll see what to do or they'll get ideas. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, one of the generic things that clients do is they self-diagnose the problem and come to me to help them implement the solution. So say, well, the problem is my people aren't motivated. So how do I motivate them? Well, the problem is we just, our productivity is way down. How do we boost our productivity? Well, the problem is, cash flow. So how do we affect? And I kind of know the chances of the problem being what they've diagnosed it as are really limited. Not that they don't have productivity issues, but those are downstream. So I take time with them. I listen. I encourage them to listen. I point out the difference in real time between when they're noticing and when they're thinking, arguing for, fixing, figuring out, and all the other things that we do that make us feel busy, like we're working on it, but are bringing a saw to a hammer party. It's just the wrong tool for the job again. And at some point, and this always happens, somebody, occasionally it's me, usually it's one of them because they know a hell of a lot more about their business than I do, goes, oh, what if we just change this? And it's often something that once you see it, you cannot understand why you didn't see it. But until you saw it, it was like, I always think of that. I think it was in Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where they're in, at least in the UK version, when I lived over there, they used to say all the time, hey, it's only easy when you know the answer.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. But you're right, because often you'll hear people say it was right in front of us.
Yeah.
The answer was there all along. Yeah. That's great. Okay, Michael, next.
So this one is getting a little bit more, I don't know, it might sound a little bit more esoteric, but it's also really at the heart of a lot of what people are up against. Is everybody is looking at the effect of thinking. And almost nobody is looking at the source of thought. Now, I'm saying thinking and thought. We could say creativity. We could say innovation. We could say fresh ideas. We could say insights. We could say breakthroughs. It's all thought. It's all what comes from inside the system and then allows you to create outside the system. So probably the best example I've got for this is I was brought in by a division of the medical industry in South America. And they asked me to come in to a conference, an international conference, and to speak. And I said, well, what would you like me to speak about? And they said, well, basically, we need you to convince everybody that things really need to change and that they can change for the better. Because right now, people are still making money. But as an industry, we are aware that this industry is going to just be obscure. What's the word when something becomes no longer relevant? It's going to be gone.
I know. Yeah.
It's like when all the record stores went out of business,
Yeah.
whatever that was.
Obsolete.
That was it.
There we go.
It's going to become obsolete.
Yeah.
If we don't do something, but everyone's kind of just wanting to kind of close their eyes to that and keep going. And so I sat with it. I listened. I noticed. And then something occurred to me. Something became kind of obvious to me. And I went, they're thinking that they need to do something with, to change, as opposed to seeing that change is the end result of something. Change happens inside first. Trying to institute behavioral change, we've all seen how that works. You use punishment and reward. You use, threats and bribes. You use bonuses, and we know how it works. If you're really, really on it, it sort of gets people to stick around a bit longer and work a little harder till they don't. Well, here's what occurred to me to do with them. And this was, so there were 400 people, mostly leaders of owners of companies, industry leaders in their field. And I ordered 400 tubs of Play-Doh to be delivered to the conference, which is harder than you'd think to get, but we got it. And I handed out everyone a tub of Play-Doh. And I said to them, okay, make some shapes. So everyone kind of played with Play-Doh and we're making shapes because it's fun. Play-Doh's fun. Then I said, okay, make something out of the Play-Doh that's representative of how you're feeling about the industry or your company's role in the industry. And people made smiley faces or little tears or, they did all sorts of things. And I said, okay, now put it back together. Because that changes, right? So it's not, you don't want it to harden in one feeling because you'll have different feelings at different times. I said, now make a shape that is representative of what you see as the biggest obstacle in your field or within your company. And people got very creative. They made little lattice work prison cells. They created walls, brick walls. They created, one guy, and I think he was actually the CEO of like some big company, but he created this dinosaur, and I was like, what is that? And he said, well, these are the enemies. These are the people who are trying to monitor us and stop us and devour us. And I was like, all right, cool. I said, so here's your choice. You can take your monsters and your prison cells and your walls, and you can try to figure out how to overcome them. Or you can take your Play-Doh, put it back in a ball, and create something different out of it. And what I was trying to illustrate was that we deal with our problems as if they are not made of thought, as if they're real and permanent and fixed. And so consequently, we're downstream. We've got to deal with the effects of bad thinking, bad strategic thinking, inaccurate predictions, whatever it is, poor management, like thinking that people are going to respond if I keep them insecure and under pressure, like whatever the fruits of that thinking are, that's what we think the problem is. Most people don't see that the nature of thought is infinitely creative. Mm-hmm. You can always go back to the fresh Play-Doh. Yeah. you can always go back to zero and think again. And when you see, you know, the slide that I put up, you know, said, thought is the Play-Doh of the universe, right? We are continually creating scenarios via this creative capacity inside us. And when we think we have to deal with the shapes we've made in the past, well, that's hard, and they get brittle and they're difficult. When we realize there is no point at which you cannot think again, where you cannot go back to the drawing board, where you cannot clear the desk and start from zero, then you are always at what the artist Michel Cassou called point zero, where you could literally go in any direction. And it's amazing what comes to us in that place, but it's amazing how little time we spend there.
Yeah. No, I think, again, this is another really profound kind of place to look and to see, like you're saying, that we have infinite capacity to have a new idea. And it's like, you know, I used to, when I first started working with people in this way, I had years and years of training, and I thought I already kind of thought I came to the table with a good ability to read people and intuitive. And it was fascinating just to sit in that place that you're talking about, Michael, and say, what else? You know, and not go with my first inclination, not go with what I think I'm seeing, to know that there's another way to see it. There's another idea to come through, and to hang out in that space is so generative. So yeah, creative. That's very cool. Okay.
Last
Are we
one.
at number 5?
We are at number 5.
Okay.
And this is a shift. So when people start to see how pivotal thinking is to their business, from top down, it's you know, it's upstream. If your thinking is off, all the fruit of your thinking will be off. In law, they talk about fruit of the poisonous tree. If the original evidence is wrong, then everything that comes from that evidence is wrong. If the original thinking is off, then everything that comes of it is going to be off in some way. So the actually quite logical place people go is, okay, how do I get better thinking? How do I control my thinking more? How do I make sure that our thinking is accurate? And again, not a bad idea, except the nature of thought is much more fluid than that. It's much more intangible than that. It's like trying to catch air in a butterfly net. As soon as you think you got it, it's gone. So the shift is from better thinking or more control over thinking to quiet, to the space before thought. Now that's it's similar to what I was talking about in the last one about point zero, but it's more tangible for a lot of people because you can feel quiet in yourself. You can feel that stillness. You can feel that potential energy where the roller coaster's at the top of the hill and it hasn't gone anywhere yet. That pause. And I wish I could do justice to the power of that pause, the power of that place of hanging out in that space before the next idea, before the solution, before the problem. It's an extraordinary experience that everyone I have ever worked with recognizes the moment they hear it, even though when a lot of them often will, when we're first talking, they'll go, what the hell are you talking about? And then there'll come a moment, invariably in the first hour or two we're together, where they'll go, oh, I know what you mean. We all recognize it. But we think of it as a sort of a rare place that we occasionally might get to if we did a meditation program, or we got a chance to get away from the office, or we went for a long drive, or we had to deal with a crisis. And no, it's actually ever present. It is the place where all the answers live. It is the place before the questions. And we are so well designed. The human mind is so freaking amazing that if you will go back to that place, if you can get familiar with that place, comfortable in that place, literally there is nothing that cannot be solved. There is nothing that cannot be created. But it's just a place we're so unused to even looking. We're always looking to more, better. We never go all the way upstream before even the nature of, to see that the nature of mind itself is still, is quiet, is expansive, is infinite. And everyone I have ever worked with who touches that space starts to get its power. And it just varies how long it takes for people to look upstream, to look towards that. And it usually doesn't take long once they look for them to start to notice and see.
Well, and that's what I was just going to say. It really is when people have their own felt experience of it and they notice it. You're right. I think it immediately they realize that it's powerful, it's generative, it's anything but passive. And I just say that because I know initially, and you know this from working with me, didn't have a lot of respect for quiet, like in a spiritual way, I got it, but I had no clue what it would fund both in my business as well to have more experiences of that within myself.
So I'm working with a group of CEOs right now, all different businesses, all different levels. And we were together last week and the question came up, how much time are you spending focused on the next 3 weeks? And how much time are you spending on the future? Now, what was interesting is when the question came up, my assumption was that the cool business people would be thinking about the future and the stressed out business people would be thinking about the next 3 weeks. What actually happened across the board is everyone who was doing well was thinking about the next 3 weeks, but noticing the impact of what they were doing now on the future. And it's exactly what you just said, that we underestimate this at our peril. We underestimate the present moment and what can be created in the present moment, the quiet and what can come through that quiet. But actually, it's not just the solution to what's going on now. It is exactly what sets us up for optimal futures. And it's just fascinating to see. And it's one of those things that, again, the difficulty isn't seeing it, it's getting people to look. And I remember sitting down with a client once, and she kept agreeing with me. And I don't know if you find this, but I do definitely find the hardest people to work with are the ones who agree with me, because they think they already know what I'm talking about. And they nod a lot and they, oh yes, we're very smart, you and I. And I was one of them, by the way. When I was first learning this, I totally was that guy. Oh yeah. Well, I thought, oh yeah, I understand.
I know this, yeah.
I teach this stuff. And I said to this woman, I said, I don't think you could be looking. Because if you were looking, you would be going, holy freaking mother of God right now, and you're not. And she was like, oh, no. And I said, okay, let me give you an example. I said, there's an orchid over there. Look at it. I said, I saw it when I came in. And I said, look at the orchid. She said, I know there's an orchid over there. I honestly, I think I probably tried for about 3 minutes. I finally walked over. I wouldn't normally do this. I put my hands on her face and did that. And she burst into tears, not because I grabbed her, but she suddenly got that she hadn't been looking at all. She'd been thinking about it. She hadn't been noticing. She'd been trying to fix. She hadn't been quiet. She'd been trying to be smarter. And it all just kind of clicked in for her in that moment. And that's what I love about this conversation is I know there are people listening who really are getting a lot of it. And I know there are people listening who are wondering why they're listening because they're not getting much. At any moment, you can see the orchids. At any moment, you can touch and be touched by that space before thought. At any moment, fresh thought can come in and change the game. And that's just really cool to know when it looks like there's no way through.
Yeah, it's such a poignant, beautiful place to stop. I really appreciate it, but I also do want to give you an opportunity as we kind of come towards the end of our time. Is there anything else that you would love to share with the listeners, Michael?
I think what I have really seen in the last year, more than I'd ever seen it before, is that if I was only able to share two things with people, it would be the power of listening and the power of noticing. Everything changes from there. Not professionally listening, but actually allowing things to come in, allowing yourself, not noticing to fix, just noticing. I underestimated the power of that for the first 50 years of my life. I will never underestimate that again.
Well, thank you so much. I want to recommend people listen to this over and over again. There's been so many wonderful and powerful points that you've made, and thank you so much. And as always, Michael, so much love to you and appreciation to you for the work that you do, how you show up in your life and in the world. And I'm so grateful to you. And we'll let people know how to get connected to you when they listen. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to see you, Barb.